My grandfather kept a small glass jar on the windowsill above his ceramics wheel. Inside, it was a lump of raw red clay no bigger than a walnut, dried hard and cracked around the edges. He told me once that it came from the riverbank behind the house where he grew up in rural Kentucky, that he'd carried it in his shirt pocket the day he moved to Cincinnati at 19 with nothing else to his name. He said it wasn't a lucky charm. It was a reminder that everything he would ever make had to come from somewhere real. He pressed it into my hand the afternoon he died, when I was 14 years old, sitting beside his hospital bed while the monitors made their quiet, indifferent sounds. He told me to keep it until I'd built something that couldn't be taken. I didn't fully understand what he meant. I do now. My name is Waverly. I'm 31 years old, and for the past 7 years, I have been doing exactly what my grandfather told me to do. My father is not a bad man. I want to say that clearly because nothing that follows will make him sound like a good one, and the truth is somewhere more complicated than either. He built Henning's landscape and design from a borrowed truck and a pushmower when he was 26 years old. By the time I was in high school, Henning's had 22 full-time employees, a commercial contracting division, and a reputation across the greater Columbus, Ohio area as the company that made ugly properties beautiful. My father is methodical, disciplined, and almost pathologically committed to the idea that a business runs on systems, not feelings. He is also the kind of man who mistakes certainty for wisdom and has never once in his life entertained the possibility that he might be wrong about something fundamental. My older brother, Garrett, inherited all of these qualities. He was managing crew schedules at 17, running bids at 20, and sitting across from my father at the conference table by 23 like he had always belonged there. Which, in my father's mind, he had always belonged there. Which, in my father's mind, he had. Henning's was always going to be theirs. The plan existed before I was born. I was the deviation. I started making pottery when I was 12. My grandfather taught me. He had a small studio in his garage in Clifton, a neighborhood in Cincinnati where he'd lived for 40 years. And on weekends, I would take the bus from our house in Dublin and spend the day with my hands in clay while he talked about form and function and what it meant to make something by hand in a world that manufactured everything by machine. He taught me that the wheel didn't do the work. You did the work, and the wheel just gave you a place to stand while you did it. After he died, I kept going. I converted a corner of our basement into a workspace, saved my babysitting money to buy a small kiln, and spent every weekend I wasn't in school throwing pots and mugs and bowls that were mostly terrible and occasionally not. My father called it a phase. That was the word he used consistently, reliably, for 6 straight years. Phase. Said the way you might say weather. Temporary. Unworthy of serious consideration. The confrontation that changed everything happened on a Sunday in April, the spring of my junior year of high school. I had just been accepted into the ceramics program at the Columbus College of Art and Design, full scholarship, merit-based. The letter arrived on a Saturday and I read it in the driveway before I even went inside. I waited until Sunday dinner to show my parents. I set the letter beside my father's plate. I placed 3 of the pieces I was most proud of on the table next to it. A tall, cylindrical vase with a ash glaze I had developed over 8 months of testing. A set of 2 Unomami cups that had taken me 15 attempts to get right. And a shallow serving bowl that my ceramics teacher at school had called the best student work she had seen in 12 years of teaching. I had brought them up from the basement and arranged them on the table the way you might arrange an argument, with care and intention and the private hope that the evidence might speak for itself. My father picked up the letter. He read it. He set it down and looked at the pieces on the table the way he looked at landscaping proposals from subcontractors he didn't plan to hire. Thorough. Already decided. He told me it was a real accomplishment. He said that in a tone that made clear he didn't mean it the way it sounded. Then he told me that CCAD was a good school for people who wanted to teach art. He told me that Columbus State had a solid business administration program and that starting there would give me the foundation to step into an operational role at Henning's within 2 years if I worked hard. He told me that Garrett was going to need a partner eventually, not just staff, and that a family business needed family in it to survive the long term. I told him I didn't want to work at Hennings. He looked at me for a long time. My mother was very quiet at her end of the table. My brother studied his plate. My father told me, calmly and without raising his voice, that creative pursuits were fine as supplemental income but catastrophic as primary ones. He said that pottery was something people did in retirement, that the market for handmade ceramics was vanishingly small, and that a full scholarship to an art school was a generous offer from an institution that was, at its core, preparing students for a lifetime of financial instability. He said he had built something real and lasting specifically so that I would never have to struggle the way he had, and that walking away from that to throw clay was not independence. It was ingratitude dressed up as passion. I told him I was going. He pushed back from the table, he walked to the counter and poured himself a glass of water, which was what he did instead of losing his temper. Then he told me that if I chose CCAD over the path he had built for me, I would be choosing it without the support of the family financial structure. No help with living expenses, no fallback, no place at the Hennings table, now or later. He said he wasn't punishing me. He said he was being honest about how the world worked. I said I understood. He walked to the basement door. He went downstairs. I heard the sound of movement, of things being shifted and set down. He came back up carrying the ash glaze vase in one hand and the serving bowl in the other. He walked to the back door, opened it, and set both pieces on the concrete step outside. Not violently, not dramatically, with the practiced efficiency of a man clearing space for something more important. Then he went back down and brought up the Unomi cups and set them beside the others. He came back to the table, sat down, and said that when I was ready to think practically, he would still be here. I went upstairs. I sat on my bed for a long time. Then I remembered the jar. The little glass jar with the Kentucky clay inside it, sitting on my nightstand where I'd kept it since the afternoon my grandfather put it in my hand. I held it for a while. Then I opened my laptop and looked up the financial aid packet that had come with my acceptance letter. The scholarship covered tuition, a studio materials stipend, and a modest housing allowance. I had $1,400 in a savings account from 4 years of babysitting and odd jobs. I had the bus schedule from Dublin to Columbus memorized. I had, somewhere in my chest, a feeling that I could only describe as a door that had been pushed open from the outside and could not be closed again from within. I called my grandmother in Cincinnati that night. My grandfather's wife of 51 years, who had watched me grow up at the wheel in his garage, who had brought us both lunch on the weekends and never once said that what I was doing there was impractical or misguided. She listened to the whole story without interrupting. Then she told me to come see her the next weekend. She said she had something to show me. I took the bus to Clifton on Saturday morning. She met me at the door and walked me through the house to the small room off the back that had been my grandfather's study. She sat me down at his desk and opened the bottom drawer and took out a folder. Inside it were 12 years of deposit receipts from a credit union in Cincinnati. A savings account opened in my name when I was 2 years old and funded with small, consistent deposits that had never once been mentioned to me. The total balance was $22,000. She told me my grandfather had started the account the first time he watched me sit at his wheel. She said he told her I had a different kind of attention, the kind that didn't drift. She said he always believed I would need a runway, not a safety net. She said a runway was different because it assumed you were already going somewhere. I sat in that room for a long time before I could speak. I did not touch a dollar of that money for comfort. I rented the cheapest room I could find, a narrow second-floor bedroom in a house shared by 4 other students near the CCAD campus, and I bought groceries the way I bought clay, in the smallest quantities that got the job done. The scholarship stipend covered materials. My savings covered the rest. I built a budget the way I built a glaze formula, testing and adjusting until it held. The first year was about learning to fail correctly. My professors were rigorous in a way my high school teachers had never been, and the feedback was specific and often humbling. I threw hundreds of pieces that went straight into the reclaim bin. That dense plastic tub of water and failed clay that sat in the corner of every studio like a reminder that the material was patient even when you weren't. I kept notes on everything. I developed a practice of working until something surprised me and then stopping and figuring out exactly what had happened and why. By my second year, I had a name. I called my line Coldwater Clay, after the street in Clifton where my grandfather's studio had been. It wasn't a business yet. It was just a name I gave to the work that felt like mine. By my third year, it was a business. I had a small Etsy shop and an Instagram account and a Saturday booth at the North Market on High Street. The first weekend I sold 4 mugs and a bud vase and made a $112. I stood in my kitchen that night and stared at the number for a long time because it was the first money I had ever made from the work, and it felt like a different kind of real. I graduated with honors. I did not invite my father. I invited my grandmother, and she wore her good blue coat and brought me a single piece of my grandfather's work as a gift, a small pinch pot he had made in his first year of throwing, rough and uneven and completely beautiful. I ate dinner that night with 3 of my studio classmates at a Thai restaurant on Short North, and we split a bottle of wine and argued about reduction firing until the restaurant wanted to close. That felt like enough celebration. The years after graduation were not linear. I moved into a 1-bedroom in Clintonville and turned the 2nd bedroom into a studio. I applied for an Ohio Arts Council grant and was rejected. I applied again and was rejected again. I kept the booth at North Market. I built a wholesale relationship with a kitchen and home store in German Village that started ordering mugs and bowls in small batches and then larger ones. I submitted work to a regional juried show and got in. Then I got into a bigger one. Then a buyer from a gift shop chain in Chicago drove to Columbus specifically because she had seen my work at the juried show and wanted to talk about a wholesale order. Coldwater Clay started to look like a real company because it was becoming one. I rented a small, dedicated studio space on Indianola, an old converted garage that smelled like motor oil and winter even in August. I hired one part-time assistant, a ceramics graduate student named Elliot, who needed the hours and had the kind of hands that understood clay without being told. I paid him what I could. He showed up on time every day and stayed late when the kiln was running. A food and lifestyle magazine out of Columbus ran a feature on the North Market that included a photograph of my booth. The caption described my work as heirloom quality. That word traveled farther than the article did. 3 boutique hotels in the Columbus area reached out about custom commissions for their guest rooms and restaurants. I said yes to all of them. My father became aware of what I was building the way you become aware of weather, gradually and without being able to point to the exact moment it changed. My brother called me once about 3 years after I left. He said our father had seen the magazine feature. He said our father called it, and I'm quoting precisely because I wrote it down, a nice little side business. I thanked my brother for calling. I went back to the studio. 8 months ago, a man named Hugh Prescott walked into my booth at a design fair in Columbus. He was wearing a gray blazer and carrying a portfolio, and he introduced himself as the creative director for a hospitality company called Fieldstone Properties. Fieldstone operates 16 boutique hotels in the Midwest and Mid-Atlantic, the kind of properties that design everything with intention, where the coffee cups in the restaurant are chosen the same way the art on the walls is chosen, as an expression of something specific about place and craft. Their properties had been using a mix of vendors for tableware, and they'd been dissatisfied with all of them because nothing felt considered. Hugh had found my work through one of the hotel commissions and driven to the design fair to meet me. He put a proposal sheet on my table. Fieldstone wanted a multi-year exclusive partnership with Coldwater Clay. Custom tableware for all 16 properties, beginning with a pilot program at 4 locations and expanding from there. The initial contract value was $640,000. They wanted my story on the menu cards. They wanted the brand. They wanted the clay and the history behind it. I asked Hugh for a week to review with my attorney. He said to take as long as I needed. He bought a set of 4 mugs on his way out. That evening, I was at my studio drafting questions for my attorney when my phone rang. Ohio area code. A number I didn't recognize but knew immediately. Some numbers you just know. My father didn't begin with small talk. He opened the way he'd always opened difficult conversations, directly, efficiently, and at a volume slightly too large for the room. He told me he had heard about the Fieldstone offer. The business community in Columbus is small and well-networked, and news like that doesn't stay private for long. He told me he was calling with a proposal. Henning's Landscape and Design had been going through a difficult period. Two of their largest commercial contracts had gone to competitors who'd undercut them on price. The residential division was holding, but the commercial margins were compressing. My brother was managing the operational pressure, but the revenue gap was real. My father was looking at his first genuine contraction in 20 years, and he didn't know what to do with that feeling, so he called me. His proposal was concise. He wanted Coldwater Clay to come under the Hennings umbrella as a subsidiary. He would provide business infrastructure, his existing client relationships in the hospitality and commercial property space, and access to the Hennings name, which still carried real weight in Central Ohio. In exchange, I would give his company a 40% stake in Coldwater and move production operations to the Hennings commercial facility on the east side. He said it was a natural fit. He used the word synergy with complete sincerity. He said family businesses were stronger when they operated as unified entities. I listened to the entire proposal without speaking. Then I told him I would think about it. I wasn't going to think about it. I already knew my answer, but I gave myself 24 hours to make sure the answer was coming from clarity and not from old anger that had been sitting at the bottom of me like sediment for 7 years. The next morning I drove to Antrim Park and walked for an hour. The lake was doing what Ohio lakes do in October, gray and flat and quietly beautiful in a way that had nothing to prove. I thought about my grandfather's clay jar on the windowsill. I thought about my grandmother in the blue coat at my graduation. I thought about Elliot coming in early the first time we had a large hotel commission because he'd stayed up researching glaze durability standards for commercial dishwashers and wanted to show me what he'd found. I thought about $112 in a Saturday afternoon at the North Market. I drove back to the studio. I called my attorney and signed the Fieldstone contract. I called my father that afternoon. I told him I was declining. I told him I understood that Hennings was navigating a real challenge and that I hoped genuinely and without irony that they found their way through it. I told him I had no interest in a long conflict and no appetite for bitterness. I'd carried those things for long enough to know they were heavy and useless. Then I told him the truth. I told him that 7 years ago, he carried my work to the back step and left it outside like something that didn't belong in his house. I told him I understood now that he believed he was protecting me from a hard road. I understood he thought that what he had built was a gift he was trying to give me, but the road was mine to walk and the difficulty was the point, not the obstacle. Every time I failed at a glaze and had to start over, every rejected grant application, every Saturday I packed the van at 6 a.m. to set up a booth in the cold. Every time I wasn't sure the whole thing was going to work, that was the work, not despite the struggle, because of it. I told him that Coldwater Clay was named for the street where my grandfather taught me that the wheel didn't do the work, that you did the work, and the wheel just gave you a place to stand. That the $22,000 in that credit union account was my grandfather's quiet, unwavering belief that I was going somewhere real. That Elliot, who could have gone anywhere, chose to spend his mornings in a cold garage on Indianola because he believed in what we were building. I told him I was not interested in the Hennings name. I had built my own. The line was quiet. My father said, after a long moment, that my grandfather always said I was the one who would figure things out my own way. I said I knew. I said he was right. I told him I wished him well. I meant it. Then I said goodbye. The Fieldstone partnership launched 6 weeks later. The pilot ran at 4 properties in Ohio and Indiana. By the end of the second quarter, all 16 properties were serving breakfast on Coldwater Clay. I brought Elliot on full-time and gave him the operations manager title he'd earned. I hired 2 additional production ceramicists and expanded into a second kiln room. I started a small apprenticeship program for CCAD students that paid a real hourly wage, not course credit, because my grandfather never asked me to work for free. On the wide wooden shelf above my studio door sits a small glass jar. Inside it is a lump of red clay from a Kentucky riverbank, dried hard and cracked around the edges, no bigger than a walnut. It came with me from Dublin to Columbus, to this converted garage on Indianola, where the kilns run 6 days a week, and the work is never finished, because the work is never supposed to be finished. My grandfather taught me that in the way he taught me everything, not by explaining it, but by showing me what it looked like to do it every day, to come into the studio in the morning and center the clay and begin again. He was right about the jar. He was right about all of it. If you have ever been told that your passion was a phase, that your work was decorative rather than real, that someone else's plan for your future was a gift you were being ungrateful to refuse, I want you to hear this. The thing you make with your own hands, from your own conviction, in your own time, does not require anyone else's permission to be worth something. It never did. Center the clay. Begin again. The wheel is waiting. I still think about the moment my father set my pottery on the back step. Not violently, not with anger, just with the quiet certainty of a man who believed he was making the correct decision. That's the part that stayed with me longest, not the rejection, but the confidence behind it. He wasn't cruel, he was convinced. And for a long time I confused those two things, which made it harder to move forward cleanly. What I understand now is that the outcome of this story wasn't luck, it wasn't spite either. It was cause and effect, slow and unglamorous and completely reliable. Every choice I made in that narrow second-floor bedroom near campus, every Saturday I loaded the van before sunrise, every failed glaze I reclaimed and started over. Those weren't sacrifices. They were deposits, the kind that don't show a balance until years later and then all at once. My grandfather understood something about integrity that I had to learn through repetition rather than instruction. He never told me to be honest or to do the right thing. He just showed up to the wheel every day and did the work the same way whether anyone was watching or not. That's what integrity actually looks like, not a declaration, but a practice. A consistency between who you are when it's easy and who you are when it costs something. I think about Elliot staying late when the kiln was running on a commission we weren't sure we'd fulfill in time. I think about my grandmother and her good blue coat at a graduation my own father didn't attend. Both of them showed me, without saying a word about it, what it means to stand behind something because you believe in it, not because it's convenient. The intelligence piece took me longer to trust. I was a systematic thinker from the beginning. The glaze notebooks, the hydration ratios, the way I documented every failure so I could learn from it specifically rather than generally, but for years I dismissed that as just being careful. What I eventually understood is that careful applied to the right questions is a form of real intelligence. Knowing what to study, knowing what the failure is actually telling you, knowing when an opportunity like the Fieldstone offer is the thing you've been building toward and not just the thing that happened to arrive, that's not luck either. That's accumulated judgment. You build it the same way you build anything, slowly, with attention. And then there's the part nobody talks about enough, which is endurance. Not the dramatic kind, not pushing through one big crisis. The ordinary, unglamorous kind that shows up at 6 in the morning when the studio is cold and the order is due, and nobody is watching and you do it anyway. That's what my grandfather was teaching me at that wheel in Clifton. Not technique. Endurance. The willingness to begin again tomorrow with the same commitment you had today, regardless of what today looked like. My father built something real. I will always respect that. But he confused the map with the territory. He thought the business he built was the lesson, when the lesson was always the building itself, the discipline, the integrity, the decision to keep going when it would have been easier to stop. The clay jar is still on my shelf. I feed it every morning, the same as always. That's the whole story, and it's also the whole practice.